with that. Nina.
Thank you, Jane and Matthew. We've got temperatures fairly close to 20 degrees in a few spots where there's some sunshine around, but we're still coping with some very heavy showers down across southern areas. If we take a look at that rainfall picture, you can still see those southern counties seeing some really quite heavy downpours around. A little bit further north, then we break out into the clearer skies. We've got some sunshine for Northern Ireland, northwest Scotland and northwest England. A little bit cooler and cloudier along that east coast with a breeze coming in from the North Sea. Through the night tonight, then the last of the showers clear away through the English Channel, and for most it's going to be a dry night. A bit of patchy cloud around, some breaks in the cloud giving some clearer skies. So yet again we're expecting temperatures across parts of Scotland to dip down fairly close to freezing. But after a fairly chilly start to things tomorrow, it should be another fine and dry day with some bright spells around. Now to southwest England, a greater risk of seeing perhaps a few showers around with a low pressure system advancing here through the day. The showers just beginning to push their way northwards, and the best of that sunshine holding on to the north and the east of the country. There's a more detailed forecast for the rest of the week on our BBC Weather website.
This is BBC News. I'm Matthew Emery-Waller. The headlines at 3. An independent investigation uncovers evidence of the appalling abuse of 1,400 children in Rotherham. The vast majority of perpetrators were of Pakistani heritage.
It is hard to describe the appalling nature of the abuse the child victims suffered. They were raped by multiple perpetrators. They were trafficked to other towns and cities.
Police and social workers are both accused of failing to protect some of the most vulnerable children. The council leader resigns. The chief executive says sorry.
I offer my sincere apologies to the young people who have suffered such horrific abuse.
A handshake for Presidents Putin and Poroshenko. They attend a summit as Ukraine puts what they claim are captured Russian paratroopers on television. Boris Johnson confirms he wants to be the Tory candidate in Uxbridge at the next general election.
And I'm Jane Hill. Also in the next hour, a heated debate about the Scottish referendum. Voters weigh up the arguments after last night's bad-tempered debate about independence. A Snap poll declaring Alistair Darling was trumped by Alex Salmond. The World Health Organization calls for a ban on the use of electronic cigarettes in all public indoor spaces. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to BBC News. In the last hour, a shocking report looking at child sexual abuse in Rotherham in South Yorkshire has been released. An independent investigation has found evidence of what it calls the appalling abuse of at least 1,400 children over a period of 16 years, from 1997 to 2013. It details children being raped, trafficked, beaten and sometimes doused in petrol. The inquiry says almost all the perpetrators were of Pakistani heritage. Professor Alexis Jay, a former Chief Inspector of Social Work in Scotland, said there were blatant failures by both the police and the council to stop the abuse. And she said clear evidence outlined in 3 separate reports was disbelieved, suppressed or ignored. Well, just in the last few minutes, the leader of Rotherham Council for the last decade, Roger Stone, said he is taking responsibility for what had happened and had resigned from his post. Well, the report's author, Professor Jay, gave graphic details of what she said the victims had endured.
It is hard to describe the appalling nature of the abuse the child victims suffered. They were raped by multiple perpetrators. They were trafficked to other towns and cities in the north of England. They were abducted, beaten and intimidated. There were examples of children being doused with petrol and threatened with being set alight. They were threatened with guns, made to witness brutally violent rapes, and threatened they would be the next if they told anyone. Girls as young as 11 were raped by large numbers of male perpetrators. The detail of this information and the 15 pen pictures of exploited children, which we include in Chapter 5 of the report, were all taken from official records, files and minutes. And we could have described many other children whose experiences were just as awful.
Professor Alexis Jay, and she went on to say that much more still needs to be done to help the girls and boys who've been abused.
The authorities involved have a very, very great deal to answer for here. I think immediately they must ensure that those girls get the help and support they need now to enable them to live ordinary lives, if that's at all possible for them. That's not the case at the moment. They are not getting access to the kind of therapeutic help that they might need. A small number are, but there's not nearly enough support provided to help them to deal with the experiences they've had. I think their parents are rightly angry in many instances, with very good cause. And the authorities should consider very carefully what their response to those parents is now.
So the person who led that inquiry there, Professor Alexis Jay, well, after her address we heard from the Chief Executive of Rotherham Council, Martin Kimber, and he apologised to all the children involved.
We all have a responsibility to protect our young people from these predators. But it's clear from today's report that we, the Council, and other agencies that work with us failed in that duty for a significant period of time. For this, I am deeply sorry, and I offer my sincere apologies to the young people who have suffered such horrific abuse, and also to their families for the devastation this will have caused. Today is about making sure those young people have their voices heard. Many were courageous enough to recount their horrific experiences as part of the independent inquiry to help to ensure that others who may be at risk today in Rotherham and other parts of the country can be better protected.
That was Martin Kimber, and he went on to say that he was, however, unable to hold to account any other individuals in the council.
The report covers a significant period of time. Officers in senior positions responsible for children's safeguarding services throughout the critical periods when services fell some way short of today's standards do not work for the council today. To that extent, I have not been able to identify any issues of professional practice relating to current serving officers of this council that require me to consider use of disciplinary or capability procedures. Neither is there anything that has emerged that is so clear-cut about any single individual officer that I feel able to make a referral to any professional standards board.
So that's the Chief Executive of the Council. Well, as we've been saying in the last few minutes, as soon as that report was published, the leader of the Council, who is Roger Stone, and he'd been in charge since 2003, said he was resigning with immediate effect. He issued a statement. He said the report highlighted historic failings by Rotherham Borough Council in tackling the scourge, that is, child exploitation. And the statement goes on to say, having considered the report, I believe it's only right that I, as leader, take responsibility on behalf of the council. Well, our correspondent Mike Sargent has been following all of this afternoon. He's in Rotherham. He's been listening to all these statements. So much of this detail, Mike, so distressing, of course. And one of the things that is so shocking here is the sheer scale.
Yes, the scale of the abuse over so many years in just one town. 1,400 victims, according to the report's author, Professor Alexis Jay, who's with me now. Nobody really expected this report would produce a number as great as that for just one town. You've spent your whole life, your career in child protection. How shocked are you by that?
Very shocked. I had no idea what the scale of this would be in advance of the work we did. And it gradually emerged, both from the council's files that we were aware of, the total number there, and the many other files and minutes of discussions about individual children that we read dating back to 1997.
Because so far, when these reports of sexual grooming and exploitation have surfaced in individual towns, they've been focused on particular cases or groups of individuals, these so-called grooming gangs, of which a small number have been prosecuted and convicted. Have we then been missing the bigger picture and the true horrific scale of this abuse, which is only now coming to light through your report?
It's difficult for me to answer that because it's not clear and nobody can say quite what the extent of child sexual exploitation is across the UK indeed and in England, because there are no means nationally of checking and comparing numbers. But I would imagine Rotherham would not be the only town where the crimes were overlooked in the late 90s and early 2000s.
So we could be waking up now to a much bigger problem than even the shocking cases we've heard in individual towns have suggested so far.
Yes, but I cannot, there's no basis for confirming that. It just seems likely.
Now, you've investigated what was going on in this town, but you've also had a glimpse inside a council. Rotherham Council in this report seems deeply dysfunctional over many years.
There are aspects of it that were extremely detrimental to addressing this issue, both at member level and at officer level.
And yet, among the officers, nobody seems to be resigning today. Nobody seems to be sacked, disciplined in any way, although the leader of the council has resigned.
Yes, indeed. And given the scale and seriousness of the issue, it seems entirely appropriate that he did.
Would it be appropriate then for others to resign?
I couldn't comment on others. The leader of the council was there from 2003, I think. So there are a range of people who have been in positions of power for shorter periods, so it's very difficult for me to say whether they should or should not.
Okay. Professor Alexis Jay, thank you very much. I'd just like to bring in Christine Empson now for a perspective from the victims, who's from Victim Support. You've been hearing some of the details in this report for the first time, as we have today. From the point of view of victims, just how disturbing is some of this information?
I think it's very disturbing. I think across the country it's a problem. But I just want to say that I think it's been very brave of victims to come forward and actually highlight the things that have happened to them. And a lot of it is historic abuse. And I think that the victims that have come forward and moving forward with the reporting is very positive for them. And I think it's been very brave of them as well.
We had that rather uncomfortable press conference here with Martin Kimber, the chief executive, in which he repeatedly apologised to victims. But that's not enough, is it?
Nothing can change what's happened to those victims. All they can try and do is, with all the support that's available, move on with their lives, deal with all the issues that they've experienced. It's been a horrendous crime and they need appropriate support. They need systems in place to help them and to establish them back into communities, to help them with all the trauma and get on with their lives as best they can.
Okay. Christine Empson from Victim Support, thank you very much for joining us. And questions too in that press conference about the level of support that the council was giving to those 1,400 victims who were not identified in this report, but the report suggested that that was the total number, shocking in its scale, and still no real sense of what the council is doing beyond an apology to support them on a day-to-day basis, as well, of course, as all the many questions about responsibility, about how to improve council services, and what this shocking report means for other towns and cities across the country where there have been other cases of this type of sexual exploitation and grooming.
Mike, thank you for now. Mike Sargent there in Rotherham, and we will have more, of course, about that story over the course of the afternoon and any reaction that may come through as well. So we'll talk more about that later in the afternoon.
Now to other news, and the Russian president is meeting his Ukrainian counterpart this afternoon, but the fighting in Ukraine has intensified, with Ukrainian television showing pictures of soldiers it claims are Russian paratroopers captured in Ukrainian territory. Moscow says they crossed the border by mistake. Here's our World Affairs correspondent Nick Childs.
A raging fire casts a pall over a suburb of Donetsk in Ukraine's troubled east. The result of shelling as Ukrainian government forces and pro-Russian separatists continue their deadly struggle. Indeed, the stakes and the tensions are on the rise again. These, according to Kiev, some of the 10 Russian paratroopers it says its forces have just captured in a direct Russian incursion in the east of the country. Moscow has said the troops crossed the border by mistake. But Kiev has clearly rejected Moscow's explanation so far.
We think it was not a mistake. It was a special mission they were carrying out. That is why the Russian military leadership must think about what they are doing.
At the weekend, the separatists had paraded captured Ukrainian government troops through the streets of Donetsk, still their main stronghold. The Belarusian capital Minsk is the setting for the latest diplomatic effort to try to defuse the crisis. But the awkward handshake between the Ukrainian president and his Russian counterpart, a graphic illustration of the gulf still between them. Any hopes of real progress here and of easing tensions between Moscow and the West were already low even before the latest turn of events. Before he left for Minsk, the Ukrainian president had announced the dissolution of the country's parliament.
I made a decision about the early termination of the parliament. The elections for the new parliament will take place on the 26th of October. The decision was made according to Chapter 90 of the Ukrainian constitution.
The president's rationale to rid the parliament of his pro-Russian predecessor's influence. On the ground in the east, Ukrainian government forces have been pushing the separatists back, adding to the pressures on them and the Kremlin, and perhaps entrenching diplomatic positions that still seem far apart. Nick Childs, BBC News.
Well, Oleg Gevorgiev is in the Belarus capital, Minsk, where the presidents have been meeting. And Oleg, we saw the handshake there, but has there been anything more concrete progress in terms of bridging that enormous gulf between the two sides?
I'm afraid not. No one expected a huge breakthrough, and none is coming so far. Both presidents spoke out, but it's been noted that Vladimir Putin was speaking more about economics, more about the harm which Ukraine's reorientations toward European Union may do to Russia. Poroshenko was talking. And he didn't seem to offer anything particularly new. He said he still believes his peace plan, made of 15 points, is still a very workable basis for bringing peace in Ukraine. Well, one trouble, this peace plan was first published in the end of June, and it hasn't got any traction since then. We have little expectation that somehow immediately this will change. Vladimir Putin briefly noted that Ukrainian authorities must talk to their own people in the east of the country. For those who followed the statements like this is an indication Moscow is keeping with the same line. Kiev is not battling any incursion from Russia. According to Moscow, Kiev is battling its own citizens. It needs to stop fire and start talking to them. Well, this is something that Kiev rejects, saying that rebellion is being instigated by Moscow.
Well, Oleg, thanks very much, and apologies that we lost a little bit of the sound there talking to our correspondent.
Just a reminder of the headlines here on BBC News at a little after 3:15. An independent investigation uncovers evidence of the appalling abuse of 1,400 children in Rotherham. The vast majority of perpetrators were of Pakistani heritage.
Police and social workers are both accused of failing to protect some of the most vulnerable children. The council leader resigns. The chief executive has apologised.
And in other news, Presidents Putin and Poroshenko shake hands at a summit as Ukraine puts what they say are captured Russian paratroops in front of the TV cameras.
And in just a moment, police carrying out stop and searches agree a new voluntary code of conduct in England and Wales.
And in sport, Frank Lampard's 15-year England career is over. The 8th most capped England player announces his international retirement after 106 appearances and 29 goals. Arsenal will be without Olivier Giroud for the second leg of their Champions League playoff against Besiktas tomorrow night. Manager Arsene Wenger says the striker's ankle injury could be long-term and he's seeing a specialist tomorrow. And Angel Di Maria is expected to complete his British record move to Manchester United today. The near £60 million fee will take United spending beyond anyone else so far this summer. And I'll be back with more on those stories just after 3:30.
The Metropolitan Police is launching an appeal for members of the public to help identify homegrown terrorists. They want friends, family and neighbours to watch out for people who are about to travel to the Middle East or who are showing signs of becoming radicalised. Our Home Affairs correspondent Dominic Casciani has been speaking to Assistant Commissioner Paul Rowley, who's the UK's top counter-terrorism officer.
I want to appeal to the public, to communities, to family members, again, to help us identify people who are potentially aspiring to be terrorists. We're finding at the moment that a big proportion of those who are looking to travel to Syria, indeed the travellers, are not previously known to us as terrorists. And that's why we need to look to the public to help us to identify people who are potentially dangerous, whether we need to prosecute them or whether we can intervene earlier and prevent that.
Why have you decided to make this appeal this week?
There's been a lot of informed and uninformed comment in the media over the last few weeks with various events around terrorism. I think it's important to put some facts in the public domain. The public won't be surprised to know that our work has grown massively in recent months. My officers are working exceedingly hard. And if you just look at arrests in connection with Syria, they're at 5-fold this year compared to last year. That's just an indication of what's going on. We had a few arrests over the weekend. There's a constant drip feed of activity with some very dangerous people. But at the centre of this, as I say, we're discovering that nearly half the people who are travelling to Syria and getting involved in terrorism were not previously involved in terrorist activities. That's obviously a matter of grave concern. We try and intervene early, but we also need the public help to help spot these people so we can get hold of them before they cause any damage.
Well, Assistant Commissioner Rowley also called on the public for help in identifying whoever was responsible for murdering the American journalist James Foley.
I know all journalists are under pressure from editors to get a scoop on this story. It's a live investigation. Ourselves in the police and security agencies are working incredibly hard to get to the bottom of what's gone on, given the awful acts that have been circulated on the videos and the tragic death. I'm sure you'll understand, though, that we're not going to give any more detail on that. This investigation needs to be done in private and quietly because we're confronting dangerous people. It needs to be done carefully and properly.
What would be your message to anybody out there in Britain who knows the man who was behind that mask?
As I said at the start, with my general appeal about aspiring terrorists, if anyone's got any particular information to help us with on the Foley case, then of course they should call us. And again, the anti-terrorism hotline would be a good start. We need the help of the public in confronting terrorism, and that's the purpose of today's appeal.
Do you need help specifically on trying to identify the man who carried out this attack?
Any information from the public on this attack will be welcome, but today's appeal is primarily about looking to identify new aspiring terrorists being drawn into this warped ideology, potentially travelling to Syria. The sooner we can spot them, the sooner we can protect the British public from any threat they pose.
Well, it was Dominic Casciani there, our Home Affairs correspondent, who was asking the questions. Let's talk to him a little bit more at New Scotland Yard. How optimistic do you think, Dominic, is the police that actually the general public can help here? What's the point of this today, do you think?
I think this has been a very significant statement by Assistant Commissioner Rowley for two reasons. First of all, he's trying to keep things calm, put things back in perspective. He talked earlier about dealing with a very small number of extremely dangerous individuals. This is not some kind of jihadist threat which is out of control. But at the same time, I think he's making clear that the police really do need help dealing with those people they have identified or fear they have identified who are either going to Syria or have gone to Syria. I think it was very significant that the Assistant Commissioner said that nearly half of the people they thought had travelled to Syria were people who were previously unknown to the security services. Now, as you can imagine, the police and MI5 have a lot of resources at their disposal to try and work out where a terrorist threat comes from. But the fact that they're saying over Syria that nearly half of the people who've gone out there and have got hooked up with jihadist fighters were people they hadn't heard of indicates how this phenomenon has changed and has morphed within target communities which have been targeted by extremists. Assistant Commissioner Rowley was very concerned about the threat, the glamorisation of jihad via social networks. He talked about the police trying very, very hard to keep on top of that. But he also said he had a message for Muslim communities who feared that they couldn't work with the police. He said, you can absolutely trust us. He said, we need your help, because it's only with that hard intelligence, those tip-offs from within the community about where a threat was coming from, that they can make a difference. And he said, specifically in relation to allegations that the government's de-radicalisation and preventing extremism scheme, in specific reference to allegations that had been failing, he said that information from that was working. They were stopping 10 people a month from travelling to Syria, so they were making progress, but he really feels that they need more help in the months to come.
All right, interesting. Thanks very much for now. Dominic Casciani at New Scotland Yard. Thank you.
Now, Boris Johnson has revealed he wants to be the Conservative candidate for the Uxbridge and South Ruislip in West London at next year's general election. The London Mayor's spokesman confirmed Mr Johnson is applying for that role amid speculation he's positioning himself to be the future Tory leader. Well, let's go to Westminster, speak to our political correspondent Arif Ansari, who is there, and there is always speculation, of course, about positioning. Let's leave that aside for a moment. Is he a shoo-in? What are the constituency saying?
I don't think he's quite a shoo-in, Matthew, but you have to say that if they're looking for a Conservative candidate with real star power, it's difficult to see how they could do better than Boris Johnson. It's somebody who's got recognition factor perhaps second only to David Cameron. Now, the nominations for this seat will close at the end of this week, and then it's at the end of the middle of September when the local party will get together and the membership will vote on who they actually want to represent the seat. There have been soundings from senior members of the Constituency Association who've welcomed him, calling him a major national asset for the party, so they're clearly very pleased that he's heading their way, but it's not definite that he would be selected, because it is quite possible in these kinds of meetings that something goes wrong or that another candidate does particularly well. And I think that they're going to be wanting to ensure that they get somebody who's not just a big national name, but somebody who's going to really be able to champion the constituency as well.
Assuming it goes to his plan, for number 10, it's a return of a big hitter, but the flip side is perhaps a big hitter with other aspirations on his mind, ultimately. I mean, there are costs and benefits, aren't there?
There are, and David Cameron's previously said that he welcomes the idea of getting his big star players back onto the pitch, but he wants those star players working for him, not with aspirations to be the team captain. Now, if Boris Johnson does return, if he does get the selection, if he almost certainly would win the seat, it's a very safe Tory seat, and comes back into the Commons, then I think the question is what happens at the general election. If David Cameron gets a majority, then I think in the short term Boris Johnson would remain Mayor of London until his term was up, combining that with the job of MP. Incidentally, something that he previously said couldn't happen, but he's changed his mind on that now, saying that the two roles are compatible. What happens, though, if the Tories don't get a majority and go back into opposition? What happens if David Cameron stands down as leader of the party? Does Boris Johnson then put himself forward for party leader? Because is it quite so easy to combine being leader of the opposition with being Mayor of London? I think that would be much more difficult. So Boris Johnson, David Cameron always had a bit of a tetchy relationship. David Cameron will be pleased to have a big hitter on his side, but as you point out, there could well be tensions too.
All right, Arif Ansari, thanks very much. Thank you.
The World Health Organization says an unprecedented number of medical staff have been infected with Ebola. To date, more than 240 healthcare workers have developed the disease in West Africa, and more than 120 have died. It comes as a British nurse who contracted Ebola in Sierra Leone is continuing to receive round-the-clock care in a North London hospital. More details from John Brain.
The moment Ebola arrived in Britain, this was William Pooley being transferred to a hospital in London under police escort after falling dangerously ill in West Africa. The 29-year-old nurse had been in Sierra Leone bravely tending to patients who'd contracted the disease. A few days ago, he spoke of his joy at seeing some of them recover.
It's great seeing them walk away after some of them have been in a terrible state, and been seeing them on the wards.
But Mr. Pooley is now a patient himself, receiving emergency treatment at the Royal Free Hospital. A sealed tent is being used to protect the doctors and nurses looking after him. Will Pooley and his fellow health workers have been on the front line in the fight against Ebola, working long hours in often poor conditions. So it's not surprising that they're at risk themselves. But the number of medical staff falling prey to the disease is causing alarm. The World Health Organization says 240 care workers have now contracted Ebola in West Africa, and more than half of them have died. It says shortages of both staff and adequate protective equipment are partly to blame.
The organisations who are sending these doctors and nurses must make sure that they are well trained and well aware of the risks and know how it's transmitted, so they can minimise the risk.
The charity VSO has taken the decision to take its staff out of Sierra Leone altogether.
The risk was that Ebola was spreading so far that we couldn't ask our staff just to be quarantined, if you like, within Sierra Leone. It was more effective to redeploy them elsewhere where we can guarantee their health and safety.
William Pooley is also back and receiving the best possible care, but it could be weeks before it's known if his treatment is to prove successful. John Brain, BBC News.
Well, our global health correspondent, Tulip Mazumdar, is with me. You've been to Guinea, you've seen the impact of this. I suppose no surprise in many circumstances that healthcare workers do get infected.
Exactly, and there's a number of reasons why this is happening. When we heard there about there being a lack of protective gear, and some medics treating people are simply not wearing anything when they're looking after patients. This is passed on through bodily fluids, so when they're doing that, they've got a very good chance of picking it up. These are also very poor countries. They don't have a strong health system, and whereas we saw the British patient being treated in a high-tech isolation chamber. In West Africa, what we saw were hastily put up isolation treatment centres, and there were hundreds of patients being looked after by just a handful of medics, and the medics that are there are completely overstretched. They are not getting enough rest. They're working very long hours in these very heavy biohazard suits which can reach up to 40 degrees, and so what the WHO, the World Health Organization, is saying is that they're more prone to make mistakes in those sorts of conditions. So they might take their gloves off early, or they get tired, they start rubbing their eyes. Again, that's something that you would do without thinking, but that puts you at much higher risk of getting infected if you've just been looking after an infected patient.
Oh, of course, and a quick thought about the scope of this, because 4 countries predominantly that have been affected thus far, I think, but now we hear of cases in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yes, and this is a very separate outbreak to the one that we've seen in West Africa. So in Sierra Leone, Guinea and Nigeria and Liberia, that is one outbreak. There has been a separate outbreak that has happened to happen at a similar time in northern DRC. The government there have confirmed 2 cases, 2 deaths I should say, around 13 cases, but it does look at this stage like that is a different strain of the virus. They've set up a quarantine zone around 60 miles around that particular area. DRC has had Ebola in that country before, so in a way they're better placed to deal with it. It's really in West Africa where the focus, the international focus, is at the moment.
Right, so that one is a separate strain. Yes, that's interesting. All right, thanks very much, Tulip, for now. Tulip Mazumdar, thanks very much.
Let's pause for a moment across the news and find out what the weather is doing. Let's join Nina Ridge. Nina, hello.
Hello Matthew, thank you. Good afternoon. For most it's dry and it's bright, some seeing temperatures into the low 20s, but there are still these heavy showers around, and for the next couple of hours we're likely to see a few more of those affecting southern counties. They will eventually through the night clear away. Then we're looking at some dry conditions, a bit of patchy cloud coming and going, some clear skies once again across parts of Scotland, mean that it is cold enough for the risk of a touch of frost, whilst our major towns and cities staying above freezing, a touch on the chilly side at around 10 to 11 degrees. But after that chilly start, things should do quite nicely tomorrow, mainly dry and bright with some sunny spells around. The sunniest conditions across northern and eastern areas. It will be cloudier down to the southwest, with some fronts approaching, throwing in a few showers through the morning, and it looks like they'll just spread a little bit further north up through the Bristol Channel as we go through the afternoon. Temperatures here around the high teens. Certainly a warmer day tomorrow for southeast England, 22 degrees in London, and on Thursday for most places it should be dry and fine. The rain clearing through the night and a few showers elsewhere. But you can find more details on the forecast for the rest of the week on our BBC Weather website.